One of the most pernicious lies that has been told by our society is that the mindset of the nerd is the one that wins. This is completely false. So let me be very clear in what I mean by nerd. There are two ways of viewing life. There is the view that says that we build upon our strengths, and there is the view that says we build up our weaknesses. The nerd mindset is the former. This also happens to be the prevalent idea in our entire society. We are a society of nerds. We are a society of people who focus in on very specific strengths and spend years upon years upon years building up on those strengths. We have experts in things that are tiny, everywhere, and people who overly specialize. And to quote Heinlein, specialization is for insects. But Ephraim, I hear you say, don't you study software? Yeah, I do. Don't you make a channel entirely devoted to obscure medieval philosophy? Perhaps. But the thing is that no interest is innately nerdy. Except for maybe anime. That is really nerdy and you should probably stop doing that. However, for most of my teenage years, I had that mindset of building upon my strengths and completely ignoring my weaknesses. And you know what it did? It made me resent people. It made me resent people with strengths in areas that I didn't have. Because I had the mindset of just working away at this skill. Working away repeatedly. And while it did make me incredibly good at one thing, that one thing being programming, I've been doing it since I was 12, I really lacked in other areas. For example, I 100%ed my first year Advanced Object-Oriented Programming test. I also did the same thing to my test on integration and differentiation. But I didn't know what a bench press was. I couldn't run a mile. What kind of a man is useful who can do some very specific skills that involve sitting in a chair, and yet he can't even push his body weight over his chest? What kind of a man is that? A weak one. A non-virtuous one. And it took me some time at university to realise that. I realised when I got out into the world that I needed a way to live. A way that was systematised to live. Because through the programming, I'd learnt everything is systematised and everything has rules. So there must be rules. And so I went away and I read the people that I figured knew. I went and read the ancient philosophers. And I discovered something very, very interesting. That my mindset of building upon my strengths was fundamentally wrong. And then in that moment, I was enlightened, not by my own intelligence, but by God, and by a sense of humility, wherein I learnt that I actually had to build upon my weaknesses and notice them. And when I noticed those weaknesses, I started to note them down, and over time I've kept that habit of noting down my weaknesses when I discover them, and then fundamentally changing my life so as to work on them, so that they would be no longer weaknesses, and they'd in fact be strengths. For example, with the gym, I just didn't go. I occasionally swam and that was it. So I started going to the gym. I read into nutrition. I read into lifting and learnt that so that I could take care of my body. And while it's been somewhat successful, I haven't completely succeeded yet. I'm at the point where I can lift more than the average lifter, but not by much. Likewise with running. I noticed the other week that I couldn't run as far as I'd like, so I've gotten into the habit of running every day after my lifting. And now, I can run a mile pretty trivially. I did a mile and a half yesterday for reference. And that's not to say that simply entering a gym solves that problem. There are so many nerds in the gym. There are people who put hours upon days, learning very specific movements for tiny little gains. Tiny little gains, maybe £5, when they're lifting 600 on the bench or something ridiculous like that. Those are nerds as well. They are just as bad as the guy who spends 18 hours a day watching anime so he can find out Kawaii-chan's name or whatever they're called. You were made not simply to type code at a terminal. You were made not simply to read. You were made not simply to push large objects over your head. You are a complete human being with a soul and a body, and in order to not be a nerd, you must focus on both. You must lift and read. You must do all of these things so that you can gain aptitude in all of them, because that is how you develop virtue. And virtue is what distinguishes the nerds from the normal people. Now, what is virtue? Well, in order to answer this, we must answer the question, what does vir mean? Vir in Latin means man or hero. So, virtue, or virtutis, is what becomes of a hero. A man or a woman can have virtue. The Blessed Virgin Mary had a very high level of virtue. Likewise, the saints all have high levels of virtue, because they are becoming of what man is supposed to be. And those saints are there because they are close to the apex of what man is supposed to be. Now, how do we gain in virtue? A great place to start, if you are Catholic, is to go and watch Father Chad Ripperger's lectures on the 7 virtues. Those virtues being prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, charity, hope, and faith. Go and watch those. They're about 7 hours, and take notes. Take copious notes, because he not only tells you what they are in very technical, very granular detail, he also tells you how to obtain them. If you don't want to watch lectures and you want to read, I cannot recommend highly enough reading the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Go and get the audiobook on LibriVox and listen through it. It'll take you maybe a week. It's pretty short as far as those books go, and if you're still hungry for more, go and read the Secunda Secundae Pars of the Summa Theologiae by St. Thomas Aquinas, where he goes into granular detail again about the virtues. If all of this stuff sounds very, very complex, I can sum it up for you in a sentence. And this, of course, doesn't go into specific detail. If you notice that you have a particular vice, which is the opposite of a virtue, so if you are low in fortitude, you'll be weak, or something like that, right? If you notice a vice, practice the opposite virtue. If you're not loving people enough, practice love. If you aren't strong enough, deliberately do difficult things. And finally, guys, I'd like to make a request of all of you, because you guys are great, and you can help me in more ways than I can possibly surmise. Because all of you, being the likeness and image of God, are universes unto yourselves. I'd like to ask you to share this video. I'd like to ask you to give this to friends, not so that this can get views, but so that we can get rid of this pervasive mindset, because our society needs more generalists. Because not only is it becoming of a man to develop these virtues, and therefore focus on our weaknesses, as you learn more of these strengths, they compound upon one another. For example, I must have read about 20 to 25 books on theology last year, just out of interest and to know the subject. And one of the things it's helped me the most in is how to approach human interaction. Because theology teaches you a lot about man. It teaches you a lot about how man thinks. And therefore, knowing this, you can approach social interaction in a far more strong and rounded way, and therefore get people to like you. In addition, the class systems in object-oriented programming languages assisted me significantly in understanding Plato and Aristotle. Now, you might not know what any of that just meant, but my point is that different areas of knowledge and different areas of virtue assist the other areas. Because really, these things like fortitude, they aren't separate from, say, temperance. They're all united. We just call the particular parts certain things so that we can actually talk about them intelligibly. So, remembering that, please like and share this. And I really appreciate you watching, guys. Please tell me how it goes. Thanks so much to all the new Renaissance Man subscribers, because we've grown massively over the last month or so. So many more people are enjoying audiobooks and controversial videos than were before. So, I really hope those who are watching would consider signing up, because these people are clearly enjoying what they're getting. Thank you very much for watching.